Okay, are we ready? Here we go. So my next part here is going to be a little bit about how to get along with the family and figuring this all out. And that becomes a kind of a sticky wicket. Yesterday when we were doing the state meeting up at Central City, the lawyer just flat up said, the lawyer told that crowd of 45 we had at Central City yesterday, he said, all of the estate planning stuff in terms of me as a lawyer putting the tools in place for a family, that's the easy part. Getting a family to agree that this is the way we're going to go, that's the sticky wicket. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay. So when you get land from mom and dad pass away, or you have to figure out what you're going to do with your land now, get it to the next generation, you probably have to get the family together and talk about that. Are you going to sell it, keep it, rent it, keep it, manage it? All parties need to agree on that future. And that gets to be very difficult sometimes because there's personalities involved that kind of tend to block taking this whole thing forward. All right, now, yeah. The communication on this thing is imperative, and the families have to be communicative. Of the families that are getting in trouble, the families that get in trouble with this sort of thing, first of all, I don't think it's a very big percentage. I think maybe 10, 15, 20% of the families get in trouble. The other 80% of the families still get along great. That's good. I'm glad to know it's that positive. But of the families that get in trouble, I would say that 80% of the time, 80, 90% of the time, the reason families are in trouble on getting along on what they're going to do with property is because of bad communication. The whole idea that I'm not going to communicate, or I don't choose not to communicate, those kind of things. So communication is critical. I suggest that if you're going to talk about a property and decide what you're doing, either as grandpa and grandma deciding what they're going to do for their kids, or as you deciding what you're going to do for your kids, or grandpa and grandma deciding what they're going to do for their grandkids, that the first conversation not ought to be what we're going to do with that South 80 or the North Pasture. We don't talk about specifics. Let's have the first conversation be, when we get done with what we're doing today, are we going to have a family or not? When we figure out what we're going to do with our property, our assets, are we going to have a family or not? If we would just have that commitment, and instead of that making that assumption, it might change the whole tenor of the conversation. It might change how we look at things, and that's important. Be open and clear with communications. Oh, by the way, the older generation didn't ever want to tell us anything. My parents' generation was huge, and I know I sound critical, but it was just their value set. You have to understand that the old Germans, the old Czechs, the old Polish, and the old Swedes, the four primary groups for Nebraska, especially eastern Nebraska, those four groups, that Eastern European culture, said you don't share your business with anyone. When I grew up, if we would harvest the farm out on the highway, to Highway 33 that goes between Crete and Dorchester, we'd harvest out there along the highway. We'd go into town and say, somebody go, how'd that field do? We saw that you harvested it the other day. If I would say anything close to the actual yield, I'd be in trouble because mom and dad said, you don't share our business with anyone. So I'd have to say things like, well, you know, that field, it missed a rain, so it didn't do as good as we'd hoped. Or whatever. We'd have to say whatever you're going to say, but you couldn't say what the yield was because you were in trouble. Now I've got people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s coming to me saying, well, I'm the personal representative for my mom who's in the nursing home, and now I find out on the 13th to 14th of March that they're telling me she has dementia. She can no longer really answer for herself, and I know when I talk to her, I'm really not getting any good answers from her anymore. Since I'm the personal representative, even though I grew up on the farm, I haven't been on the farm for 40 years, and now I've got to deal with this rent deal. And we have a neighbor that's renting the place, the neighbor's renting the place, and I don't know what the deal was. And by the way, there's no written lease, it's a handshake verbal agreement for lease. Always has been, that's what we're going to continue to do. So essentially, because this mother has got this ingrained deal that I'm never going to share my information with anyone, now the daughter who's got to deal with this farm doesn't have a clue. And she essentially has to go to the tenant, the neighbor, and trust that he'll tell her the truth about what the rent agreement is. You know, a lot of cases that'll still be fine, but I'm not sure you feel comfortable about that. Let's put it that way. So be clear with communication. Who participates in that discussion? I suggest that you always keep everyone involved in that discussion. I've had far too many women in their 40s, 50s, early 60s that have come to me and said, Allan, I don't understand. When I grew up on the farm with mom and dad owned all the cattle. Now I found out that my brother owns most of the cattle, who's farming with mom and dad. And when I grew up on the farm, I know that my mom and dad owned all the equipment. But now I find out that my brother, who farms with mom and dad, owns quite a bit of the equipment. What happened? And when I grew up on the farm, all the land was rented and owned by my mom and dad. Now I found out that my brother is renting most of the ground. I don't know what happened, because they never kept that off-farm sister involved or communicated with. I'm not suggesting that the parents or the on-farm brother did anything wrong at all. They probably didn't. Everything was probably absolutely on the up and up. But I would suggest that because she wasn't told what was happening, now she's got suspicion, and it leads to lack of trust. And if you don't have trust, you don't have anything. You have to have trust. So make sure you follow through that way. Okay. Question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
More of a statement. I think the individual you're talking about needs to show more interest in what's going on.
Okay, so the suggestion is that the daughter, who's been left out of all these conversations, needed to ask questions over the years to find out what was going on. That could be true too. It's a two-way street. I'm okay with that. I get that. Okay. All right. But yeah. All right. I think I'll go on from there. If you're going to have some kind of a family meeting to discuss these kinds of things, schedule a meeting, but not at major holidays. Stay away from Easter. That's the next one. Don't do it at grandma's kitchen table or the family kitchen table, because everybody knows that the family kitchen table, grandpa sits on one end, grandma sits on the other end, and number one son sits here, and number one daughter sits here, and da-da-da. Everybody's got their assigned seating, just like in church. You have your assigned seating. So don't allow that to happen. Make sure you get to a neutral site or a neutral table and have those conversations in a way that makes sense. Also, I think that there's lots of lawyers that would tell me I'm crazy for even suggesting that you have a family meeting. Matter of fact, most would. Most lawyers believe in the golden rule. And the golden rule in this case is not what we hear in church, do unto others, that whole deal. This golden rule is simply this. You has the gold makes the rule. So if it's grandpa, grandma, mom, and dad, they can decide. No kids involved. If it's grandpa, grandma, and the kids, no spouses involved. I think that if you're going to have a family and really want to have the family feel like they're integrated or a part of the conversation, for one conversation only, you should allow anybody who wants to come to be there. That means grandpa and grandma, the kids, their spouses, and even adult grandchildren. And when I'm not going to define adult grandchildren. I know 14, 15-year-olds that would do great with this conversation. And I know 20 and 22 years olds that shouldn't be there, grandkids. Okay, I know it both ways. The point is, that first conversation should not be about decision-making. We're not going to move the gold around. The first conversation should be about allowing everyone to have input. What do you think ought to happen to grandma's yellow pipe plate that came over here from Germany in the late 1800s? What do you think ought to happen to dad's 1959 John Deere 530 tractor that's just been restored to parade condition? What do you think ought to happen to the farm ground? Have those kind of conversations. And if you're going to have this kind of a family meeting, you have to have 2 rules in place, or don't do it. 2 rules in place. One rule is when we're talking about the ornate kitchen, the ornate dining cupboard in the kitchen. Who thinks, well, who's interested in having that? You only get to have one comment during that conversation. I'm trying to limit, I got to say this differently. Let me start over. When we're talking about that 80 that butts up against the creek, and the south 20 acres is all wetlands, one granddaughter is obviously going to go, well, why don't we take that wetlands and put it to Ducks Unlimited? Or let's put it in a wetlands reserve. And all the alpha male farmers will go, no, we farm our farm ground. We're paying taxes on that. So what you have to do to avoid that confrontation is you put one rule in place. The one rule is simply this: no criticism of ideas. All we're allowing is family ideas to come out. No criticism. Allow no criticism. I got confused there for a second. I'm back on track now. The second rule is simply this: in every family dynamic, there's always one person that just keeps talking. They never shut up. And so you have to put a second rule in place that's kind of a gag order rule, I call it, meaning that if we're talking about the South 80, you can talk about the South 80 once as a person. That's it. You get one chance. No, you can't make a second or third or fourth comment. You get one chance to make a comment. Now, when we go to the North 80 or the North, the North quarter, now you can say again once. You can say something again once. You have to put that gag in place. Otherwise, some people will just dominate the conversation, allow other people to just sit back and never say a thing. Then after you get done with this initial meeting where you're just gathering input, then you can have the golden rule in place. You have the gold make the rule with that input, right? And so that'd be grandpa and grandma, or grandpa and grandma and the kids. Never grandpa and grandma, kids and spouses or grandchildren. No spouses, no grandchildren. Not my recommendation. Absolutely not. And even though I teach this for my living right now, and my mother-in-law is still alive, and she'd probably love to have me be a part of that conversation, I'm not going. Not because I'm worried about what I say, but because I don't want a couple of sister-in-laws there. We'll just clean up the party and keep us all out of it. Keep all of us outlaws out of it. It'll just be cleaner. I think we're good. Listening is the key. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Okay. I'm supposed to stay in the camera view. Will you play along with me for a second? Just tell me what you hope to do, today's Thursday. Tell me what you hope to do tomorrow night, okay? You don't have to tell me the truth, just tell me something. You're gonna watch TV. And I think if the roads allow us, we're gonna go see our friends up north of Fremont, and we're probably gonna go to one of these Catholic fish fry deals. It's gonna be a Friday night during Lent. That's a good time. I hear they go to a church where the priest is serving beer. I think we're gonna have fun there, okay? Now, did I ask him a question about what's happening on Friday night to find out what he was going to do on Friday night? No. I asked him the question to talk about what I was going to do on Friday night. I could give a damn what he's going to do on Friday night. I'm going to talk about me on Friday night. That's what we're going to do. Okay? All right. Now, so that's not a good conversation because it's in the smallest print here. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's the smallest print, the most important thing on the slide. The most important part of my whole, that's actually the most important part of my whole talk. All day today. What are you going to do Friday night? Oh, you are? And so do you live here in Lincoln or somewhere else? Here in Lincoln? Oh, so who has a fish fry? Do you know? Oh, the where? Oh, really? Okay. And so do they have, what do they have to go with the fish? Beer. Baked potatoes, spaghetti, fries. Is it very expensive to go, or is it pretty cheap? $10. Well, that's for all you can eat, right? Yeah. All right. And so, do you go with friends, or are you gonna go by yourself? What's that? Oh, you go work the fish fry. Oh, you actually have to go fry. Do you fry the fish? Are you serving? What are you doing? All the above. All right. All right. So does the older crowd have to go and bus tables too, or do you have some younger people to help with that? Both. Okay. What I say about what I'm doing Friday night? Nothing. What am I continuing to do? Ask additional clarifying questions, ask clarifying questions, ask clarifying questions, ask clarifying questions. All right. I was particularly having a bad time with one of my brother-in-laws. I couldn't get him. I didn't understand anything about him. And it was painful to be there, and we'd have to be there a whole weekend because my wife and my wife's sister would take off and do stuff, and I'm stuck with this guy. And so last fall, we were going there for a weekend, and on Friday night, I decided I'd sit down with him and ask him questions. And I asked him, okay, so I hear I see you got cows. Talk about that. Are you trying to sell purebred? Okay, good. How are you doing your genetics? Oh, interesting. And what sires are you using? Okay, good. And I hear you're doing recip cows, and how often do you flush? And what do you do with the embryos? And where do they get stored? And who's dropping embryos in for you? And how's that working out? And when do you try to calve? And how often? And when's your sale? It's going to be on Palm Sunday, by the way. So the point is, I tried to listen. And all I did is ask questions about his cattle business. And guess what? The entire weekend went better. The entire weekend went better, mostly because he thought I gave a damn. Okay, just understand that. But you have to listen sometimes. Oh, and which takes me to my big point. My big point is, you can pick your friends because your friends ask you about you. Is my relative, that brother-in-law, ever asked me about me? So is he really my friend? No, but I don't get to pick my relatives. I just get to pick my friends. Okay. So I won't talk about the rest of this. We got to go. I talked about golden rule already. We're going to go on from there. Negotiations. Quick thing on negotiations. I got Jim back up here. I know I should have been done 10 minutes ago. I apologize. How often do we negotiate? We negotiate all the time. We negotiate for used cars or used tractors. My dad used to negotiate for used tractors. The little girls or little boys at the grocery store in the candy aisle go, I want a candy bar, I want a candy bar, I want a candy bar. There you go. You're smack dab in the middle of a negotiation. Or in this case, we're going to talk about families getting along. Families getting along. And figuring out what to do with the farm or what happens next. And it's actually a part of our everyday life in agriculture. My dad in the late 60s, my dad would spend 2 hours in his used tractor salesman's office trying to get that guy down that last 50 bucks. 69, 68, 69, 7. What was I getting paid for hauling bales? I was 13, 14 years old. What did I get paid for doing small square bales? Well, for Dad, nothing. But obviously, for the neighbors, I got paid, no, $1.50, $1.25, $1.50 an hour. That was it. I started at $1 when I was 12, and then I went up to $1.25, and I got $1.50. And okay, all right. So I got $1.50 an hour. 1969, hauling bales. I get down with this 2-hour ordeal I'm stuck in the salesman's room there, stuck in this 2-hour ordeal with my dad, beating him over the head for that last 50 bucks. We get down, we get in a pickup, we're driving home. I said, Dad, you just had to work him over like crazy just to get 50 bucks out of him, and it took you 2 hours. He looks at me and he goes, where else were we going to make 25 bucks an hour this afternoon? And he was right. Because if I'd have been hauling hay, I'd only got $3 instead of 25, and that'd have been instead of 50 actually, because that'd have been for both hours. But that's our typical thing. When you negotiations, there's 3 rules of negotiation: prepare, prepare, prepare. What my dad did was he was prepared, but what he did was a zero-sum negotiation. I gotta win. This guy's got to lose, in my mind. And I think we're working with family. We have to rethink that as a strategy. Emotions in negotiations will likely derail the negotiation. They divert attention from the matter at hand. They can damage the relationship, and they can be used to exploit. I don't think I'm going to take time to have you do this, but typically I'd have you negotiate for a widget, but with your partner, and we won't do that. If you have trouble with negotiation, these 5 things are emotions tied with negotiations that screw up the family and negotiations. These 5 things. I went to Harvard last June and took a workshop on negotiations, a 4-day workshop on the negotiations. These 5 things were 1 day of the workshop. How emotions can screw up negotiations. So essentially, we have to remember that sometimes people don't feel like they're appreciated, that they're not being listened to. And that's number 1. That's huge. If you got somebody that's being a stonewall to you on trying to have a conversation, it's typical, well, what I'm finding out, it's typically off-farm daughter that's supposed to be talking to her brother who's on the farm about what the rent should be. And that brother on the farm has been there for 50 years, and he doesn't want to talk about anything, he just wants to farm. And he's stonewalling her. Well, I suggest to her, her first conversation ought to be about, what are you going to do on Friday night? Let's break down the conversation, and let's figure out what's going on and what they're really thinking. Why are they so mad? Why are they not wanting to talk about this? Let's figure out why. Affiliation. Are we treating people's parties as adversary or as colleagues? How is my dad treating the used tractor salesman? As an adversary. Is that what we really want to do with families? Probably not. We have to treat them as colleagues. And then you got the last three, autonomy, status, and role. They tend to get mucked up because we tend to think that people are not free to make decisions that are being blocked. People are being treated as inferior instead of given full recognition. Are you fulfilled with the role that you have, or are you being treated with an inferior role? And by the way, autonomy, status, and role typically are problems with the young generation, young men or women, and it's with any woman in the conversation. Autonomy, status, and role. We tend to block that. As old white guys, we tend to block how we treat people based on those three things. So young women, Kristen, sorry, you're in trouble. You have to really work on having to beat this up a little bit, okay, and be on top of that. But understand, too, that's why some people will block you when you're trying to negotiate, because you have those two strikes against you, basically. Again, I'm going really quick on this, and I'm not going to take time to explain it all. But just understand that for the best alternative to no agreement, you always have to think about, well, what if I don't pull this deal? What is my alternatives, okay? One person was going to buy a widget for 15, the other one was going to wanted to sell for 20, and so I was hoping that the negotiation would end up at about $17.50, right, for the widget? Well, if the person that's buying the widget offered 15 and he knows he can go on Amazon and get it for 16, his best alternative to no agreement is I'm getting it for 15 or I'm buying it on Amazon. That's my best alternative, right? But the person selling the widget knows that I'm asking for 20, and if this fool this morning doesn't give me 20, I know I'll have somebody this afternoon that will give me 20, so why would I have to sell it for 15? That's his best alternative to no agreement. The alternate thought on that is simply this. If I've looked all over Amazon, I cannot find a widget, and I need a widget. If this guy won't take 15, I'm going to have to pay whatever he'll accept. I got to have a widget, so I'm going to pay 20 if I have to. On the other hand, the seller may say, I got a pile of widgets in the corner. I haven't sold one for 3 months. My family's starting to get hungry. I haven't sold enough stuff around here to make my ends meet. And so if this guy's willing to buy a widget, I better figure out how to get one sold, because I need the cash to make this happen. So he's maybe willing to take less than 20. So that's your best alternative to no agreement. That ZOPA is simply just taking the two numbers and kind of figuring out where you're willing to pay in between. So avoid zero-sum negotiation. Always try and create more value. Sell me a widget. You're selling widgets, okay? You want $20. Now here's my question. Do you have the 2019 model with the doohickey on it? Or is it a 2018 model without the doohickey? Without. I kind of wanted the doohickey, so I guess you didn't create more value for your product, so I'll give you 15 bucks. If your thing would have had the doohickey on it, or if we could add that on, I'll pay you 20. You can put it on? Good, we got a deal. Do you follow where I'm going by creating more value? Does that make sense to you? We have to always come up with the ways to create more value, and there's always ways to think about that. All right. Oh, man. Okay. All right. I didn't realize I had more stuff to do. Here we go. Is the farming era being treated fairly? Have they been treated fairly for the sweat equity they have contributed? So the sad story for me was at Husker Harvest Days last fall. A farmer came up to me and said, I'm 67 years old. I got to talk to you. I got a question. I need to know what I need to do. Farmer was 67 years old, and he was one of 4 kids. He was the on-farm kid, had been with mom and dad on the farm for 50 years. And he said, Dad's been gone, Mom passed away, we just read the will, and even though I've been there with my mom and dad for 50 years, what does the will say? 25, 25, 25, and 25. Okay? Did mom and dad give this on-farm kid proper recognition for his sweat equity he put into that operation? I'd say probably not. And I'd say that probably as parents, we need to consider that and consider that carefully. If obviously we've paid that on-farm kid a good living wage, then maybe even distribution is still fine. But in many cases, oh, here's the old secondary house, and here's a pickup, and here's a half a side of beef. And you take every third load or every fourth load or whatever, okay, of grain. That's yours. We don't do it very equitably because we've always told that kid, someday, son, this will all be yours. And then when we read the will, it says 25, 25, 25, 25. Now, a couple thoughts there. Should the kid get a more equal distribution than just 25%? I'd say yes. I mean, better. It doesn't have to be equal. It has to be fair. Not fair. If fair is not equal, equal is not fair. And secondly, my bigger problem is mom and dad are the gold people here. They're the king. They get the king. The golden rule here says that you have the gold makes the rule. So, and by the way, the other value of that old generation was they always felt like everything had to be split exactly evenly. Our parents' generation always said that. It has to be split evenly. Okay, so they didn't want to disappoint someone. And so here's the other problem I have. Why does he have to find this out at 67? By the way, if he would know this at 27 or 37 or 47 years old, guess what? He'd have options available to him to figure out what was happening when his parents did finally pass away. But at 67, his option is he's probably selling the farm so everybody gets their distribution. Because these other brothers and sisters say, I'm late 60s, early 70s, I want the money. I don't want cash rent. I want the money. I want to get this taken care of. Okay. Oh, also, little Johnny has been on the farm for mom and dad for 30, 40, 50 years, by the way. He always thinks that his contribution towards mom and dad's farm is 10 out of 10. It's because of my sweat, my work, my going to school, my bringing back technology, my use of genetics, my operations. This operation with mom and dad's rocking because of my contribution. And all the brothers and sisters that are off farm will go, yeah, little Johnny's helped. But quite honestly, little Johnny's always rode on mom and dad's shirt tails. The brains of the operations have always been mom and dad. So they give him contribution for sweat equity, but not for everything that he thinks he's made contributions at. The truth, of course, will be somewhere in the middle, but note that gap exists in contribution, perception of contribution. What else do I got here? I talked about that already. So here's the kind of one idea. 4 children, 1 farm. Instead of dividing by 25%, maybe you take it divided by 5 or make the pie slices 20% each. And the off-farm kids receive 20 instead of 25, and the on-farm kid gets that extra contribution or actually receives 40%. That'd be cool because at 40%, can I go to Farm Credit or some other bank and get a loan to buy my brothers and sisters out? Yeah, probably. But at 25%, can I get the loan? No, I can't. So maybe not even at 67 years old, but if you know it in time, you can make something work out. If you need help with family plans, consider people like clergy, trusted family, friends. Get me. I'll come and help you if you need me to police a fight. Now, I really don't want to, but if you get desperate, you can always call me. Other professional like your banker, family lawyer. And then you get into the ones that cost money like arbitration or mediation or lawsuits. And by the way, who wins if you have a lawsuit over the farm? I'm glad we're clear on that. And this list is from least expensive to the most expensive. Okay. If you need help, the rural response hotline is 800-464-0258. Joe Hawbaker, H-A-W Baker, B-A-K-E-R, is the lawyer that comes with that. Dave Gaylor, the guy that had my job before me, is associated with that. They come out and they do clinics across the state, and they give you 1 hour free with an attorney, and then Dave does the financial side. And if you need help figuring out where to start, that's a good place to figure out where to start. Okay, Jim's turn. I might have to finish up after lunch. What's that? Start again.
Under discussion, have your family
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
You don't want to have in-laws in there?
Okay, so it depends on what you want. Okay, the question is, do I want my in-laws, as a brother-in-law, sister-in-laws, those things, to be a part of a family discussion? The question becomes, what is my output for that discussion? If I'm making decisions, maybe not. If I'm just getting input, I'm saying yes. See what I'm trying to say? What do you think? If I'm getting input, I think it's okay to let everybody have his discussion. If we're into decision-making time, then just stick with the core family. Every situation is different. You'll have to make that call yourself. There's no great answer to that. Lawyers would say no.
Okay. All right, we're sitting at about 11:25 this morning. I think what we might do is we'll probably have me do the cash rents and probably run that right up till noon, at which time we'll take a short break, get our food, get situated right again. And then we might have Allan finish up roughly then. When Allan finishes up, you don't necessarily have to write so much as what you might be writing with some of the things I say, or vice versa. It's fine. So let's review, what have we talked about today? So we started talking about what we have. What is it worth, right? Allan followed that up with some of the discussion related to estate transition matters. I'm sure you didn't get all your questions answered, but as the saying goes, anytime you start a business, and land is a business, it also has a lot of emotional things attached to it. We need to think about our transition. And that's why we have Allan come talk about those things. Third part here today, we'll talk mainly on cash rents. So these are the 2019 cash rents that were reported by those that took our survey. And as part with that, we also have some information related to things on adjusting rental rates and some of these things. So just by a show of hands, who has dry land, cropland? Okay, quite a few. Center pivot or gravity irrigation? Few, okay. Anybody have gravity irrigation? Just a few. I'm not going to highlight that. It is in your handouts, but it's there. Who has grazing land, cow-calf kind of stuff? Who likes to eat beef? Come on, that's right. All right, very good. Okay, so we'll highlight dry land, cropland, center pivot, and grazing land. And I'll follow that up with some general trends that we've seen in our special features section from our real estate survey that I think might be important things to review. Probably at that time, it'll be noon. We'll have Allan wrap up over the noon hour. We'll take, after he gets done talking, we'll switch to Tyler, have another short break. You can make calls, whatever it needs to be done. I plan to be here at least through lunch. And you want to visit with Allan or I, make an appointment with us. You can meet us on campus. If you live somewhere else, we travel the state. We can make things work depending on the time of the year. So, cash rental rates. Oh, and I just wanted to highlight this. The Rural Response Hotline does these clinics. Michelle Saul, her last name is spelled S-O-L-L, is one of the women that helps coordinate this. These clinics are a 1-hour session with an attorney as well as a financial professional. They're scattered across Nebraska. I'm assuming they do them here in Lincoln. I know they used to do them up in Norfolk. The way I would approach this is if you go to them, they're not going to do your trust for you. But if you come to something like this, you're starting to get ideas, you want to run something past someone, when you go see them, have a bullet list typed up with your major, what do you have? And you can't, I know it's easy to keep going on and on and on. Allan and I do it all the time. But summarize it the best you can. What have you done? And what are you thinking about doing? Outline it, because you only get an hour. And if you are from Holdridge or wherever you live, I don't care. Joe does private practice stuff, but ask for a referral. Okay, that's a good way to network. So they can look at things. It's free. These clinics have been booked up because of the financial downturn we're in right now. But I think if you're willing to kind of work with them, it's a great place to start, especially if you've done something. Now, they won't sit there and read a 30-page trust, but laws change, things evolve, feelings evolve, whatever. So it's a great place to go. Okay. So we're going to start big. We're going to start like our outlook is on the national championship for Husker football. We're going to win it. We're going to take it all, right? Then we're going to step down to more of a county level. And then we're going to step down to the farm level. So Work with me. Start at big. We're going to work our way down. So first thing, what do we see here? Go big red again, right? See a gradual rate of decline. See a slight increase in eastern Nebraska. I would say, without giving away what county sent those in, it's up in some of the areas I hinted at earlier. Now, is 2%, 5% really up or 2% really down? My take is cash rents, you know, they're kind of stagnant, right? They gradually have been declining over time. There's that degree of asset fixity that we have attached to them that's making the challenge. Now, should I be saying my cash rent off these numbers? No. First of all, hopefully you question them a little bit after listening to me talk. But the point is, use this as a guide to kind of get ideas, okay? A lot of time people get stuck with land, which is a great problem to have. They don't even know where to start. Use this as kind of a guide to start. So we got a couple things going on up here, and I'll refer you to the bottom left-hand corner. We have what we have down there is called HAL. Let me explain this to make sure we all understand what's going on there. What the question states, if you see the survey, the question says, if you're someone taking the survey, what do you estimate the top third of cash rent is for your area? Okay, that's basically what the question says. That's the high grade. That is what's represented by the top number. We also have a question on there. What is your opinion on the average cash rent for an area? And what's your opinion on the lower third of cash rent? Okay, that's what's represented up there. So it's not from the high to the low, but it's the average of the high third down to the average of the low third, and then an average of all the responses. So that's how that's broke down. In eastern Nebraska, I said we started big. We just gave you one number on the prior slide. Now we have a range of cash rents. We've seen a range of cash rents from 230 down to 165. Average of 200. They vary fairly significantly across the state. I mean, it's just different country when you get out here, right? They talk about $20, $30 acre rent. Where I'm from, you talk about 200 to 250. Hopefully it's less than that this year. What is another resource? So everything I've showed you up to this point has come from the Nebraska Farm Real Estate Survey or the materials that Allan Vyhnalek has put together. Another resource that is done here in Lancaster County that is conducted by the USDA comes from a group of the USDA. It's this next slide here. Before you start squinting, if I remember doing this right, so save where we're at right now if you're following along, and on the back of your handouts, you're going to see, I'm sorry I didn't number these pages, but in the last few pages of your handouts, you're going to see this map that we got up here on the slides right now. You'll see it right here. This survey is conducted by the USDA. The USDA has a federal office here in town. It's right along O Street. It's a big concrete building. Don't go in there when you're on O Street doing other things, but it's on O Street here in Lincoln. And it's their statistician division. What do these folks do? They follow various numbers on production ag across Nebraska. Crop yields, crop prices, cash rents. Now I want to point out a few things here. One, if you found it in the back of your handout, make sure you're looking at the non-irrigated one, not the irrigated. I think the irrigated is the first one. If you want to find an update on this in the future, or if you'd like to find this on your computer, there's a hyperlink on the bottom page of it right here, okay? If you type that in, you'll be able to find it. I'm sorry, this is the best link, and I never was able to find it until somebody showed it to me. So that's how you find it. Their survey is conducted, notice the date, the second Friday in September of odd-numbered years. So I'm not encouraging you to use the 2017 cash rents for your farm, but there's a couple good things. So when's this going to be updated again? Second Friday in September 2019, okay? So that's when it gets updated again. But there's some things I want to point out here. On the prior slide, we were talking about this range of cash rents, updated the second Wednesday of March every year as long as I'm around. Another resource we have on cash rents, if you kind of think of this as like a jigsaw puzzle, I think a lot of us agree, okay, yeah, in this area, the cash rents are probably around that amount, but it doesn't tell me about my county. Well, the reason I bring in the USDA, even if it's dated almost 2 years now, and they will have the more recent this upcoming summer, but we can get some indications on how cash rental rates vary around in these counties here. So everybody see that, you know, maybe kind of that area I was hinting at, Dodd, Washington, Blair, Fremont area, almost looks like that's kind of up on the top third of cash rent. You get maybe more here towards Butler, maybe Saunders, maybe that's more towards the average. Now the lower third of cash rent, those might be occurring on dry land, maybe in this York, Seward, Nance, you know, Merrick, kind of this area here. Does everybody kind of see how we fit this together to an extent? Now I'm not saying this works out perfectly, but at least it gives us an indication on how cash rents vary. Who takes their survey? Farmers. Who takes the survey the University of Nebraska does? Land industry professionals. Okay, so there's some differences there. There's some differences related to the time frame they do it. And as Allan has alluded to with his dad, which is about the same like all the farmers out there, how do you think those conversations go with farmers? My name is Jim Jansen. I work for the federal government. What'd you pay for rent last year? Yeah. Everybody's very excited, right? But the reason I bring this up, this stuff does influence us. Why does the federal government care about cash rent? I know if you came to my prior workshop, I might have said it by now. Tax, okay. No, this is federal, not, there's no federal property tax yet. We'll see. What's the, well, they listen to our phone calls, right? That's why I use an encrypted texting app now. What program does the federal government pay cash rent on? Conservation Reserve Program acres, okay? The base rental rates that are on these maps here relate to the base rental rate paid on the Conservation Reserve Program. And what I mean by that is every county has a base rate, and then they put a soil index, all the different types of soil in that county from best to worst. The best soils get higher cash rent, the poor soils get lower cash rent, and there's other incentives and discounts. That's where this information goes, okay? There's been some slight changes made to the CRP program on new enrollments related to the next Farm Bill. Any existing CRP programs stay intact, nothing changes, okay? You got a contract for another 9 years, you get that until that's over, but there are some slight changes made. So this is what this is being used for. Irrigated cropland rental rates, like I said, we started at the regional, I gave you some ranges, we stepped down to the county, and we'll even step down to the farm in a few examples. Center pivot irrigated rental rates varied across the state quite a bit. The North District was down the most compared to 2018. We've seen a slight uptick, but like I said before, you see 1 to 2% up or down, it's kind of stagnant. Center pivot irrigated cropland, we've seen the rental rates vary from the high, you know, the low 300s down to the mid 240s or so in the eastern part of the state. Western part of the state, it's a little bit all over the board. You know, we get a lot lower cash rents in some of these areas where we have issues related to water rights or the consistency of water. And that was one thing that kept coming up on our survey was, and I know I'm talking about this when we're probably going to get one of the worst floods we've had in recent history this fall or spring. But water is important. We either have too much of it or not enough of it, right? How do we deal with it? So think about those water rights in your area and how that relates to the asset you might have. One other thing to note on these cash rental rates, they assume the landowner owns the entire irrigation system. If the landowner doesn't own a power unit or a pivot, we would probably charge a lower cash rent or come up with a number per acre to adjust those irrigated cash rents down to account for that, okay? The other thing on the USDA cash rental rates, a few things. If the county is in white, we got the sandhills here. We don't have a lot of center pivot irrigated cropland in the sandhills. Either there's not very much of that particular cropping practice in that area. There's not very much. There's some irrigated circles out in the sandhills and the valleys, but there's not a lot of them. It's probably for hayland. So they wouldn't report them in those areas. Or if you're in an area where they don't have enough people responding to the survey, it's in white. And it's the same reason why we see in southeast Nebraska here, there's pockets of the state where we don't have necessarily as much irrigated cropland. If your property's in an area, let's pick on like Grand Island, Kearney, there's a fair amount of gravity or flood irrigation in those areas. Traditionally, gravity or flood irrigation is going to rent, I don't know, 20 to 50 bucks an acre less than what center pivot might. The USDA does not publish a separate rate for gravity versus center pivot. What they do is they do a weighted average. So what I mean by that is in Buffalo County, if 30, and I don't know if this is true, but if in Buffalo County where Kearney is, 30% of the acreage is gravity irrigated, the other 70% is center pivot irrigated. The rate they report there is going to reflect that, okay? Who's responsible for maintaining the irrigation system? Landlord or the tenant? Landlord owns it.
Who owns the system?
Landlord. Landlord is? Do 85-year-old landladies do pivot work? I had a lady come to my talk out at Women in Ag. They sent me out there again this year. She was 87 years old and she still did the fencing. She was amazing shape for her age. She lived up in the Sandhills. She's awesome. It's negotiable, right? And Allan talked a little bit about negotiations. Now, we did a survey on that a few years ago, but beyond that, think this afternoon when Kristen talks about grazing land. Who's responsible for maintaining the fences? 85-year-old landladies traditionally don't do that type of work. Who's responsible for cutting cedar trees? I'm from Cedar County. You want to guess what we have a lot of up there? Well, it's whoever has the best back, right? So we'll talk about that, but think about that in negotiations. Landowners, my view, and I think Allan would probably agree, landowners may undervalue the time of a tenant being out there doing some of these operations. You don't pay someone 10 bucks an hour to go work on a pivot. It probably costs 150 to 200 bucks just to get somebody out there, let alone their actual time. So grazing land, we don't have quite as many people here on this topic, but I will highlight it. I typically like to talk more so on cow-calf pair rental rates. The rates we have up here is for cow-calf pairs for 1 month. One cow-calf pair for 1 month, all right? If you have a 5-month grazing season and the average is roughly $50 per pair per month, that's 50 times, you know, I know it's 49.25, but 50 times 5 is roughly 250 or 248, whatever this figures out to. What do we see here? See a little mixed responses again. Northeast and the north are quite high. Northwest, what has been reported to us is there's different types of grasses out there. Different types of grasses that influence the rate of gain. Some of these things. The southern tier of Nebraska, the cash rent's a little bit lower. The rates that we see, the USDA, when you look at their info, and you don't have to flip back to it, but the USDA averages, those are on a per acre basis. And the University of Nebraska also reports that, but I'm not going to go through that today. On the per pair basis, we also provide a range, and it's, you know, from in the east or southeast, you're running from the mid 30s up to 55, 43 up to 63. Now, I hinted at a few things, but let's think about when they talk about grazing land or talk about corn stock grazing, if that's an opportunity you might have. What are we concerned about? Fences? What else? What do cows have to drink? Water? Thistles? Cedar trees? Locusts? They're pretty, right? Yeah. My dad tells me so the thing that sucks about being the youngest kid on a farm is you inherit everything else because everyone else is gone, right? So as I indicated before, who cuts the cedar trees? The youngest person. So I tell him I want somebody else to do. You know what he tells me to do? Have kids. So it's how life works, right? But the thing is, I can tell you, if things ever dry up here in about a week or two before they start greening up, you got all that foliage is down on the ground now. You can find trees, brush, whatever. It's a good time of the year to clean it up, right? Now I have what is called Old Green. Old Green is a 1974 Scottsdale pickup. The thing makes 3 miles per gallon. I just did my taxes. I figured it out. That's what we throw all the trees and brush and crap in, right? But it works for us. The thing is, you keep up on these improvements, they maintain themselves fairly well. You don't, you know you have problems, you know you can't do some things, you know you have a quarter-mile of fence that needs to get put in. Might we consider negotiating a little bit lower cash rental rate for a year or 2 years or whatever the number of years is? We know we have a pasture, we know we have a field, whatever. Do we split it into a third, and we manage it over time? We give a discount up front to incentivize people to help out with this, and then we want to build that long-term relationship so it lasts over time. Okay? So we step from the district to the district ranges down to the county. Many of us, if you haven't set your cash rents already, you're probably getting offers, or you got some rough ideas. And I don't have a good statistic on how many cash rents are set by March 1, but it's fairly high. I'm always amazed at our call volume. We still get calls on people trying to set cash rents for 2018 yet. It's all over the board, but I do think negotiations extend into 2019 into the growing season ways. So let's look at some basic ideas. If you're made an offer, or if you're asked to make an offer, how do we come up with some ideas? There are 3 basic levels of information that we can have related to cash rents on how to figure out. And I'm going to go over 2 of them today. The first one, we have survey data. It comes out at different periods in time. Some gets updated every year, some every other year, some subject to budgets, whatever it might be. But what's a source of information? We can also find things from crop insurance agents. You can contact your local agent here in town, Tyler. County level crop yields, a source of information. We can also find, a lot of people like the idea of crop shares. Why don't we like crop shares? Because we actually have to sell the darn stuff at some point in time. It's tricky. Now, markets have been pretty calm as of late. They're not a very good price, but they haven't been way up, way down every other day. What about if we could do a cash equivalent from it? That's the second idea. And the third idea, which is in your handouts, and I'll just make a few comments here so for the sake of time. Land is an investment, right? Just like your 401k, IRA, whatever. Does land have a very high rate of return right now? What about your checking account? It's laughable, right? Given, well, the amount of money I have in my checking account's laughable, but I go to call the banker up, why didn't you send me my form that tells me how much interest I got paid last year? And he says, we only send that out if you made at least $10, right? I'm at a bank, and I'm not going to say who it is, they don't pay boo. I mean, it's nothing. It's 0.00000.00015%. Now, there's some other places you can go, these online savings accounts, and I encourage you to take a look at those if you haven't. But it's low. With the land, there's only basically 3 ways to lose it, or 2. Death or divorce, right? You can't overfeed it. You can't kill it. That's really how you lose it. You pass on and it goes to someone else. You marry someone you shouldn't have and you didn't have a prenup, it goes to someone else, right? Now, my significant other made it through family law, or she's in it right now, and so far they've done alimony, prenups, and postnups, so I'm covered, all right? All right. But when we talk about the return on it, and if you dig inside of our historical reports, we call them capitalization rates or rate of return. It's fairly low. I don't know if we're going to report any numbers this year over 3%. We had an asset that rapidly appreciated in value, followed by commodity prices that are quite low, right? So their rates are out there, but what I'm trying to get across is if you could identify what the market value of your asset is, multiply it by a rate of return, that's your cash rent. But you also have one other thing to take out of that, just as you would if you had a cash rent, property taxes, right? So there is an example on that. I make some comments, but for the sake of time, I think we'll get through my slides and it'll be time to eat. So first idea, adjusting survey data. This is a made-up county, just an example to follow along with. Hopefully it's not too hard. If you identify in this information somewhere, stuff the University of Nebraska publishes, the USDA, other resources, And if you do find any, send them to me because I want to know. I'm always looking too. The county rental rate for an area, let's say it's 135, and this is just a made up number. And the average county corn yield, it rained really good, or it's been raining in recent years, 120 bushel per acre. If you take the county rental rate per acre and divide it by the average county corn yield, we get in the bottom center there, $1.13 per bushel. What's meant by that? What that means is for every bushel of grain sold off this rented ground, $1.13 of it is going towards paying the rent. Well, hold on a second. I thought this stuff is only worth $3 a bushel, right? $3.50, I don't care. It is, right? It's not worth very much. What this goes to show is it's a fairly high number that's just going towards paying the darn rent. Plus, you got to cover input costs and harvest and plant. And then hopefully you have something left at the end of the day for your time, your investment of your time. But if we take the county rent per bushel, and my field that I have in this farm that I inherited was not 120, but 135. Maybe it was an average of 135 bushel over the last 5 years. Or maybe it was 135 if you look at the last 5 years, drop the high, drop the low, and average what's left. I don't care how you come up with it. Don't take the highest, don't take the lowest. You gotta average it or do something there. But if you take the county rent per bushel on the upper right-hand side, $1.13 a bushel, and times it by your yield, you get what is called the farm level rent. We adjusted the farm level rent from the county average. In this case, our field was a little bit better on average than what the county was. It could be poorer too, right? There are farmers out there that produce less than the county average. They exist. They may not admit to it, but they do exist. This is just one idea. If you can locate information, you can adjust it to your farm. Now, you could use UNL's rental rates. You could use USDA. You might arrive at different numbers. The thing that I like is not one point dollar value. What about a range? I come up with a range from 135 to 150, about 150. I get an offer of 142, whatever, or an offer of 123. If I get an offer of 123 and I do this, obviously something isn't aligning. Maybe my understanding of what the ground is yielding is different than what it actually really is, or whatever. I mean, there's ways to negotiate these things. Question: should landowners require operators to give yield histories? What about precision maps? You can put whatever you want in a lease. Just remember, you got to get someone else to, one, sign it, or hopefully you're getting written leases, and Al will tell some stories why you should. But the thing that Al points out, and I would point out too, is if you are sharing this information or asking for it, I would tell you it is disrespectful to go out and try to shop the block for the next best guy out there immediately the year after. But at the same time, if you're building a portfolio of records on the land, in the event you die and someone else needs to step in and they need the history, there's a lot of people that don't have a clue what their ground yields. So I don't know. Precision maps are an interesting topic. Crop insurance records, that could be a negotiable point. Second idea, if you like the idea of a crop share, but you don't want to have to market the darn stuff, what about a cash equivalent from a crop share? Cash equivalent, that almost sounds like cash rent. You're on the right par with that. So here's an example. Let's say this was for last year. My field actually yielded 160 bushel on corn and 50 bushel on soybeans. Landlord gets half the crop, the tenant gets half. It was just a straight up 50-50 crop share. The landlord share of the crop multiplied by the marketing price, that's the landlord share of the income per acre. Okay? Did I lose anybody so far? But guess what? It's a crop share. I'm on the hook, and this is a negotiable point too. I'm on the hook for maybe 50% of the seed, fertilizer, chemical expenses, whatever. I also have to pay property taxes, and my tenant also has to have the equipment and their time. Maybe you negotiate fuel in the years when diesel's over $3 a gallon, whatever. I mean, everything's negotiable. But if you take the landlord share of income per acre, 50% of the crop times the price, off of 50% of the landowner's expenses associated with that lease, the difference between that is a return to the owner on the land, or what I might consider accepting for cash rent. If I'm offered a number, somebody offers me 115 an acre, is that a good number? Well, guess what? Jim was using too high of numbers there. It was actually 810 on beans and 323 on corn. You see how the numbers can kind of shift around? The thing I would encourage you, if you're a landowner negotiating rent, do your homework before you go. And the next time we do a land management workshop here, we're going to focus a little bit more on production expenses, because that's an area I think we should probably be a little bit better on. But this is just an idea that if someone offers you a number, don't say yes, don't get upset, don't shake hands. Just say, give me a few days, I want to think things over. And in that time, you can work through some of these examples. Okay. Any questions on that? I'm going to wrap this up with a few trends, and then we'll be right in time for lunch. Anything? Okay. Okay, a few questions. I'm going to highlight from our, we call it the special features section of our report. It's on topics that I find important based on my call volume and kind of the responses we get in. People always ask me, what is the most common type of crop lease arrangement in Nebraska? Well, we actually evaluated this back in 2015. And I apologize if you can't see it very well on your handout. Send me an email and we'll get you a colored copy. Email it to you. What we've seen was in southeast Nebraska and eastern Nebraska, roughly 40% of the leases were crop share. The other roughly 47, 48% were cash leases. And the remaining 10% were flex leases. Okay, does everybody kind of understand what I'm talking about there? We've seen a lot more crop shares out in western Nebraska. So why do we have crop shares out in western Nebraska? Why do we have to have awnings above our used and new car inventories out in Scottsbluff, Nebraska? Hail, you can't get insurance on your new fleet of inventory because too many damn windshields have been broken out over time because of hail. Sharing of risk. The thing that I've been seeing based on my call volume, I've seen a renewed interest in crop share given our current commodity price levels that we've seen. We've seen landowners, they got a good tenant, they don't want to get rid of the person, but the person says, I can't cash flow this, but I'd be willing to farm it if you want to try a crop share again. I've seen some renewed interest, so I don't suspect these numbers are perfect for 2019, but I do think they're still somewhat representative. Yes, sir. So the question was, if you can't hear them and if you're online, do I have any idea what the crop share, what is most common? No. Al probably can tell you some stories. 1/3, 2/3, 60/40, 50/50. I think it's regionalized norms, meaning certain areas of the state, York County might be very common to see 40/60. 1/3, 2/3, and the landlord pays some of the fertilizer out in Scottsbluff. I've heard that before. It just depends where you're at. The big thing is, think about balancing, to say this is a landlord, this is a tenant. What percent would the landlord and the tenant, how should we divide the two of those out so they're roughly equivalent, so they're roughly equitable, okay? That's why we play with, and Al can tell you 45, 55, whatever, I don't know, I don't really care, but the point is, that's what we look at. Some other things related to crop share lease arrangements. Back in 2017 on our survey, we evaluated that question. Under the three most common that have been noted to me, the 1/3, 2/3, 40/60, and 50/50. So that's on the left-hand side there. The big three line item expenses: seed, fertilizer, and chemicals. I'll give you an example here. Under fertilizer, about 90% of the time, the landlord is proportionally sharing in the fertilizer bill, meaning they are paying 50% of the fertilizer bill. As the landlord gets less of the share, they're more than likely going to be paying less of that expense. Okay? They're getting less of the revenue. Who's responsible for maintaining the irrigation system? That's what this pie chart answers right here. About 50% of the time, it's the landlord and the tenant. What was indicated on the survey to me is a lot of folks When they talk about this, maybe the tenant does basic maintenance. Landlords step in if the expenses are above a certain amount. Third of the time, the tenant just takes care of it. The remainder of the time, the landlord does it themselves or hires someone to do it. If you have a case where the tenant owns a pivot, but the landlord owns the well or the power unit, and you agree, okay, we agree what the cash rent should be if the landlord did own the pivot, but because the land tenant is contributing to the lease by providing the pivot, what might you discount the lease? This is what this says right here. About 60% of the time, the discount rate is somewhere between 26 to 50. About a third of the time, it's between 10 to 25 per acre. Okay, that's how you read that. The other thing on the, and I think this might be a little bit more common, when it comes to the power unit, the thing you're going to actually be pumping the water with, three of the most common ones: diesel engines, propane or natural gas, or even an electrical motor. How you read this chart, let's look here in the center for a second. For a propane or natural gas engine, 43% of the time, the landlord's going to discount the cash rent between $1 to $9 an acre. And about 30% of the time, they're going to discount it 10 to 20 an acre. If you looked at the raw data like I did, 10 to 15 was a fairly common number. Depends if what kind of engine it is. The other thing that was pointed out to me on diesel engines, under the prior Obama administration, we had this high-depth emission control systems put into place. Anybody that's got these diesel engines that do comply with this, the discount rate's going to be higher because the engine costs a lot more with all that emission control stuff on it, okay? All right. And tell you my pickup has none of that on it anymore. All right, let's look here. All right, this is the last slide, and then I'm going to get done talking. Al's going to wrap up a little bit over lunch. His stuff is a little bit not quite as dense as what mine might be. If you do not have a lease in writing, we encourage you to get one. And if you don't say, well, it's a handshake deal, blame it on your age. If something happened to you and someone else had to step in, they need to have the curriculum in place that this is what was said, this is what was negotiated. It's not that they don't trust anyone. I've gotten calls before, people inherit land and they don't even know how to find the tenant because the tenant's number isn't in the phone book. They don't have a phone number anymore, right? That's a landline. So they end up, you know, they knew this person was at the wake service because they signed the book there, but they didn't give any address. So think about getting a lease in writing. Great resource comes from aglease101.org. It's put together by the North Central Extension Farm Management Committee. I'm one of the people that helps out with it. They have free leases online. And even if you do have a written lease, take a look at what they have. Maybe they have some provisions in their leases that you might consider throwing one or two of them into yours. Okay? All right, with this, is there any question, keeping in mind your question is between us and lunch? Anything quick? Yes.
Okay, at one time there was, you let your tenant know, like, first, the same thing. That's still.
So the question was, and you're stealing my thunder from Al, and he's still not listening to me, but anyways, Al will cover after lunch, and I'm not going to answer your question because he does have it in the slides. There's a difference in how we deal with verbal handshake leases versus written leases. When it comes to terminating written leases, you do whatever is in the lease. When it comes to verbal leases, you have to terminate it 6 months, if it's on cropland, 6 months prior to the beginning of the next lease, meaning you'd have to give notification by September 1. And Al will dig more into that.